The Ottoman Empire. For over 6 centuries, it was a titan of world power, a hub of culture, art, and innovation that stretched from the gates of Vienna to the shores of the Persian Gulf. We picture the grand mosques of Istanbul, the bustling bazaars, the magnificent court of rulers like Suleiman the Magnificent. But behind the gilded walls of the palaces and the opulent facades of the elite, lay a much darker reality, a reality built on conquest, and fueled by a constant supply of human spoils. We've all heard tales of the legendary Ottoman harem, often romanticized as a paradise of beauty and pleasure. But what if I told you that for countless women, this gilded cage was the final stop in a terrifying journey? What truly happened to the women and girls captured in the relentless expansion of one of history's greatest empires? The answer is a complex and often horrifying story of lost identity, brutal commodification, and for a very select few, an unimaginable ascent to power. Today, we peel back the layers of myth and propaganda to uncover the chilling truth. To understand the fate of these women, we first have to understand the mindset of the 15th and 16th centuries. In the brutal calculus of war, human beings were often seen as little more than property. For the Ottoman armies, the concept of ganimet, or spoils of war, was a religiously and legally sanctioned principle. After a city was conquered or a battle was won, the spoils, gold, weapons, livestock, and people were divided. The Sultan was entitled to 1/5 of all spoils, while the rest was distributed among the soldiers who fought. This system wasn't just a reward, it was a powerful incentive. For the common soldier, capturing slaves, particularly young women and boys, was the quickest path to wealth. These captives were not seen as civilians caught in the crossfire, they were a commodity, a tangible asset of victory, their lives forever altered in the instant their town fell. The journey from home to the heart of the empire was a harrowing ordeal. Imagine being ripped from your family in a village in the Balkans, the Caucasus, or Eastern Europe. You are tied together with dozens of others, forced to march for weeks or even months across unforgiving terrain. Disease, starvation, and violence were constant companions. This was a brutal filtering process, only the hardiest survived. Upon arrival in a major Ottoman city like Istanbul, Bursa, or Edirne, they were taken to the Azur-Pazar, the slave market. Here, they were stripped, inspected, and paraded before potential buyers like livestock. Teeth were checked, limbs examined, and bodies scrutinized for their youth, health, and beauty. This was the ultimate dehumanization, where a person's entire worth was reduced to a price tag haggled over by merchants and wealthy patrons. The value of a captured woman was determined by a cold, calculated matrix of attributes. The highest prices were fetched by young virgins, typically between the ages of 13 and 17, who possessed exceptional beauty. Fair-skinned women from the Caucasus, like Circassians and Georgians, were particularly prized for their looks and often commanded astronomical sums. But beauty wasn't the only factor. Skills played a crucial role. A woman who could sing, dance, play an instrument, read poetry, or was skilled in embroidery or weaving was significantly more valuable. Intelligence and a quick wit could also increase a captive's price, as these traits were desirable in a companion or a potential manager within a large household. Their past lives were erased, they were now defined only by the qualities that made them useful to their new masters. The pinnacle of a female slave's potential destination was the imperial harem in the Topkapi Palace. This was not the den of debauchery depicted in Western paintings. It was a highly structured, fiercely competitive, and rigidly controlled institution. It was a family, a government, and a prison all in one. At the top was the Valide Sultan, the Sultan's mother, who ruled the harem with absolute authority. Below her were the Sultan's official wives, Kadın Efendis, followed by the favored concubines, Iqbals, and then the vast ranks of ordinary concubines, Karais. When a new girl entered the harem, her old name was stripped away, and she was given a new Persian name that reflected a positive quality, like Jil Bahar, spring rose, or Mapikar, moon-faced. She was converted to Islam and then began a rigorous education. She learned the Turkish language, court etiquette, music, dance, poetry, and the art of conversation. Her entire existence was now dedicated to one goal: catching the eye of the Sultan. From slave to empress, the story of Harem Sultan. While the harem was a prison for most, for an exceptional few, it was a ladder to unimaginable power. The most famous example is Harem Sultan, known in the West as Roxolana. Believed to have been captured during a slave raid in modern-day Ukraine, she entered Suleiman the Magnificent's harem as a nameless concubine. But through her intelligence, charm, and ruthless ambition, she did the unthinkable. She not only became Suleiman's favorite but also convinced him to free her and make her his legal wife, shattering centuries of Ottoman tradition. She moved the imperial harem from the old palace to the main Topkapi palace, placing it at the very center of political power. Harem corresponded with foreign kings, acted as Suleiman's chief advisor, and orchestrated the appointments and executions of grand viziers. Her story, while extraordinary, shows that a woman, even one who started as a captive slave, could rise to become one of the most powerful figures in the world. Of course, only a tiny fraction of captured women ever saw the inside of the Sultan's harem. The vast majority were sold to less glamorous fates. They became domestic servants in the households of wealthy pashas, government officials, and rich merchants. Their duties ranged from cooking and cleaning to caring for children. Many became the concubines of their masters, a practice permitted under Ottoman law. The legal status of these women was complex. While they were property, the law offered them some protections. A master was forbidden from killing his slave, and he was obligated to feed and clothe her. Crucially, if a female slave bore her master a child, her status changed. She could no longer be sold, and upon her master's death, she was automatically granted her freedom. Her child was born free and was a legitimate heir. This provided a twisted path to security and a form of social mobility for some. The capture of women was not just about satisfying the lust or labor needs of the Ottoman elite. It was also a strategic tool of empire building. In newly conquered territories, particularly in the Balkans, the integration of captured women into Turkish households was a deliberate method of assimilation. These women were converted to Islam, learned the Turkish language and customs, and their children were raised as loyal Ottoman Muslims. Over generations, this practice helped to solidify Ottoman control, slowly changing the demographic and cultural landscape of a region. It was a form of conquest that went far beyond the battlefield, a biological and cultural absorption of the defeated peoples into the fabric of the empire. It's easy to view these women as passive victims, and while many were, it's not the complete picture. Resistance took many forms. Within the competitive world of the harem, women formed alliances, schemed against rivals, and used their influence over sons or patrons to wield power from behind the scenes. This period is even known as the Sultanate of Women, where for over a century, figures like Harem, Kaysem, and Turhan Sultan effectively ran the empire. In regular households, resistance could be more subtle, feigning illness, working slowly, or maintaining their native language and faith in secret. While documented escape attempts were rare and incredibly dangerous, the human spirit's desire for freedom undoubtedly flickered in the hearts of thousands, even if most acts of defiance have been lost to history. How was this system justified? The Ottoman legal code was based on Islamic Sharia law, which, like other legal systems of the era, permitted and regulated slavery. The Quran urged the humane treatment of slaves and encouraged their emancipation as a pious act. However, the economic and social realities of the empire meant that the institution of slavery itself was rarely questioned. Concubinage with one's female slaves was legally sanctioned, and the system was deeply embedded in the social structure. For the Ottomans, this was not a moral contradiction but a divinely ordained social order, a system that had been practiced for centuries and was a fundamental part of their society and economy. The practice of capturing and enslaving European women began to decline in the late 17th and 18th centuries as the Ottoman Empire's military fortunes waned. The supply lines were cut off. However, the slave trade from the Caucasus and Africa continued. It was only in the 19th century, under immense pressure from Western powers like Britain and as part of the empire's own modernization efforts known as the Tanzimat reforms, that the Ottoman government began to officially abolish the trade. The slave markets of Istanbul were finally closed in the 1840s, and slavery was formally abolished near the end of the empire. A brutal chapter, which had defined the lives of countless women for centuries, was finally coming to a close. The story of the women captured by the Ottomans is a stark reminder of the brutal realities that often hide behind the grandeur of history. It was a system that stripped people of their names, families, and freedom. For the overwhelming majority, it was a life of servitude and sorrow. Yet, it was also a world where, paradoxically, a select few could achieve a level of political power unheard of for women in the supposedly more enlightened courts of Europe. It's a story of horror, but also one of survival, resilience, and incredible ambition against all odds. It forces us to look past the romantic myths and confront the complex, and often uncomfortable, truth of the past. What part of this history did you find the most shocking or surprising? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this deep dive into the darker side of the Ottoman Empire valuable, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel for more historical investigations, and share this video with someone who needs to know this story. Thanks for watching.